Is Russia a bastion of traditional conservative values? And would you want to move there? In 2024, Vladimir Putin issued a special new visa to make it easier for people in the West to move to Russia. It's called the Shared Values Visa, and it's for people who share what the Kremlin say are Russia's traditional, spiritual, and moral values. Our BBC colleague Dan Hardoon has been talking to people who've chosen to make the move. Did they find the conservative values they were looking for? I'm Tristan Redman. Welcome to The Global Story on YouTube. For the last few months, the BBC World Service's Dan Hardoon, producer and presenter, has been speaking to people from the West who've made the move to Russia.
So I first saw the Shared Values Visa being talked about almost 2 years ago now. It was part of a decree called the 702 decree that Vladimir Putin introduced in August 2024. And it invited people from the West who shared Russia's traditional spiritual and moral values to go and stay in the country for up to 3 years on the proviso that they rejected their home country's liberal values. And I was very curious about these people. What would prompt them to do that at a time that Russia was at war with Ukraine? And I just was curious to follow the stories of these people.
Tell us about this family, the Hares, who've become quite prominent in this field of Westerners who've moved to Russia.
So the Hare family originally come from Texas. It's a husband called Leo and a wife called Chantel and their 3 sons. They had a carpet cleaning business in the US and a mobile snack business. But over time, there were several issues in America that they felt disillusioned with. Things like the promotion of what they call the gay agenda, things like immigration. The husband, Leo, was also at the same time getting very interested in Vladimir Putin as a political figure and watching his speeches. And the Hare family told me about this time where they were sitting in the kitchen. Leo was watching one of President Putin's speeches on the television.
What was the appeal to them of Russia when their son said to them, "Why don't we move to Russia?"
They saw President Putin as a protector of family values. There's a lot of rhetoric about how Russia protects the traditional nuclear family, and the children are protected from influences of what they would consider gender ideology and talk about sexuality.
Okay, so they decide to move to Russia. They pack their bags. When they get there, what's their initial experience?
So they arrived in December 2023. So it's very interesting because the Hare's story predates the Shared Values Visa. They actually applied for asylum. The asylum ceremony where they received their asylum was broadcast on Russian state TV.
Oh, wow.
There's also a video that was made early on in their time in Russia where they're going around Russia sampling dumplings and borscht, and Leo's milking a goat. And initially it seems like, they found an amazing place.
Okay, so what happens next in their Russia journey?
So they arrive with some money, which is supposed to set them up in Russia. It's the equivalent of about $50,000. And through quite a convoluted story, they actually lose this money. They get conned out of this money. That's what they say. And it ends up in a situation where they don't have anywhere to live. They eventually do find work. Leo and Chantel set up as English tutors. And then 2 of their 3 sons actually end up going back to the United States because they can't get on in their schooling. But Leo and Chantel stay in Russia. And by the time I caught up with them, they'd had almost 2 years in Russia to kind of assess how their experience had turned out.
What did they tell you?
Unfortunately, by the time I spoke to them, they were separated.
Oh, no.
Chantel was still very positive about her experience. She listed several things in Russia she felt were better than the United States. Leo, on the other hand, said he's found real joy in the new Russians that he's got to know, some of whom have helped him, but he had broader criticisms. So he spoke to me about the particular city he lives in, which is called Ivanovo, which is northeast of Moscow. And he also said that he was starting to miss some of the freedoms he'd been used to in America. However, he interestingly still felt that it was his destiny to stay in Russia.
When you're talking to Leo, do you get the impression he's able to speak to you freely, or does he have to hold something back?
So I asked him exactly this question. Some of the other people I spoke to for the documentary were much more cautious. Some didn't want to talk about the political situation at all, and others only gave what I would call a very pro-Russian point of view. We're obviously having this conversation while you're in Russia, and you are freely telling me your opinions. I mean, do you feel able to freely express what you think there, or is part of you worried about repercussions, especially because you were originally held up as this model family?
You know, here's a reason I don't fear repercussions, not because they couldn't come, but because I value truth more than I value my life.
You've spoken to others. What have they told you, and how have their experiences differed from the Hares?
There are actually other people I spoke to who seem very happy with the decision they've made. I spoke to one woman called Kerry. She's from Ontario in Canada. She made money trading in the stock market, and she really, for decades, has been really in love with Russian culture, Russian language, and at the same time disillusioned with Canada, what she felt were restrictions on free speech. She signed up instantly, and when I spoke to her, she was in her first week in Moscow. She was full of optimism.
What did she? I want to understand what she said about the free speech issue. So, was she under the impression that speech is freer in Russia than it would have been back home for her in Canada?
People like Kerry and someone else I spoke to from the UK, Philip Hutchinson, they were talking about free speech in the sense of an ability to speak out and say things on social media. They were reacting against this idea that you can't say certain things in, British Canadian society anymore. And it's also important to mention about Philip that he does actually run a business encouraging other Westerners to move to Russia. So he obviously has an incentive to talk up the positives. I did put to these people, Russia doesn't have free speech. If you speak out against the government, that could leave you in a very perilous position. They just resorted to the line that, well, we have no interest in going against the politics of Russia or speaking out, so that doesn't really apply to us.
How representative would you say these people are, the Hares, Philip, Kerry, of a broader movement? How many people are actually moving to Russia from the United States and Europe?
It's important to say that the numbers of people applying for this specific shared values visa are small. I mean, Russia's own estimates are 3,400 applications as of spring 2026, and that's since the visa was introduced. But if you look online and the way that this message is being pushed, that Westerners are disillusioned and they're going to Russia instead, that message has actually been amplified quite a lot. And these families and their stories are played all over Russian media. Russian TV will interview these people and they'll be saying that the West is terrible and that's why I've come here. So it plays a propaganda role at home as well as abroad.
But it's not just Russia promoting this. There have been some prominent American influencers going to Russia, talking about the benefits of the lifestyle in Russia and quote unquote Russian values. Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens. What's their role in all of this?
So that's right. So certain very famous American influencers have taken up this cause. I think of Tucker Carlson in 2024. If you remember, he went to interview President Putin. He spent 2 hours doing an interview that many felt was not particularly challenging. But at the same time, he visited a grocery store in Moscow. He went round kind of picking items off the shelf, not really accounting for the fact that incomes are quite different in the two countries. So I think that video was a key moment because the narrative there was Russia is not what you're being told by the Western media. Everything you've been told about Russia is wrong. And that theme has really carried through to lots of influencers today. In June 2026, Candace Owens spoke at SPIEF, which is in St. Petersburg. It's sort of Russia's answer to Davos. And in this video that she put out, she said she would recommend everyone visit Russia. We've seen lots of personalities from the Tate brothers to Elon Musk's father, Errol Musk, and Tommy Robinson in Russia recently. And a lot of them are pushing this line that Russia isn't what you've been told. Among these influencers, Russia has become very tied to the idea of, this conservative country that has the antidote to everything that's wrong with America.
It was almost like a metaphysical experience is the only way I can describe it. And you feel it, like you feel the experience and you recognize that something has gone wrong and you seek to know what it is that has gone wrong, like why our society doesn't look like this, why is this safe, why is it clean?
So Kerry and Philip bought into this idea of Russia as a conservative paradise. Who did you meet who gave you a different vision of things?
That's right. I also spoke to Ben. Ben is a young guy from Derby in the UK, and he moved to Russia for love. He actually met his now wife through a language exchange website. He's not on the shared values visa. He took a private family visa. But the reason I spoke to him is because he is a YouTuber who blogs about his experience of being a Westerner in Russia. And whereas most of that ecosystem is entirely filled with just the positive things about Russia, Ben made a video saying, you know, the image of Russia as this conservative paradise is not quite what it seems. He was very open and balanced, told me some things he enjoys about Russia, but he was really pushing back on this Kremlin narrative that Russia is this really conservative place. And so there was this kind of disparity between this very strong family image and the reality of life in Russia.
To delve deeper into the disparity of how Russia projects itself on the one hand and the reality on the other, we've called up the Russia expert Mark Galeotti. He's been here with us on the show before. He presents the podcast In Moscow's Shadows, and he's one of the top Russia experts in the world. I asked Mark if the Westerners who've made this move to Russia are likely to find the conservative values they were hoping for.
I suppose the glib answer is it depends how hard they look, and more to the point, how hard they work at not noticing all the things that contradict and challenge those kind of assumptions. It's a massively multi-confessional country with a huge Muslim and indeed other Buddhist and so forth, even shamanic populations. A country with substantially higher divorce rate than the UK. We're talking about a country with still sort of higher levels of, for example, abortion. And we're also talking about a country in which, although there has been a particular pushback against, for example, LGBT plus perspectives, you will still find gay bars in all the major cities. I think people tend to not really appreciate the very variety of perspectives that you'll find there.
What about church attendance, Mark? Are Russians devout in that sense?
It tends to be estimated at around 6% are the sort who every week will go to church. I think there is, what we can say is, believing that the church has a real value in society is still more significant in Russia than in the UK and in most parts of Europe. I think that's to be said. But that does not translate to an especially devout population.
What about free speech, Mark? Like the idea that if you go to Russia, you can say things in Russia that you would not be able to say in the West. Not so much on political issues, but on cultural ones.
Well, here's the thing, exactly. I mean, you have carved out that crucial exception. You can say a lot more when it comes to, for example, pushing back against some of the sort of the cultural freedoms and the degree to which some people in the West regard these cultural freedoms as having gone too far. So you might be able to say something nasty about LGBT plus communities, but don't try calling what's happening in Ukraine a war rather than a special military operation. So, you know, this is absolutely by no means a free speech society. It's a differently censored one, shall we say.
If we zoom out a little bit, there is a long history of Russia co-opting Westerners who either move to Russia or defect to Russia for propaganda purposes. You know, whether you're thinking about Kim Philby, the British spy, or more recently, Edward Snowden. How far back does this go, Mark? And why are these sorts of foreigners so valuable in the Russian perspective?
I mean, there are several reasons. The Russians have always had an odd chip on their shoulder, to be perfectly honest, about their relationship with the West. That sense that they've always been considered the poor and backward cousins. And therefore, there is this sense that when you find Westerners coming to want to live in your country, it does have this great opportunity to basically say, look, these are people who are meant to be from the more notionally more advanced societies, but who prefer us. In the period of the Soviet Union, that had a particular ideological dimension, because it was actually these people are turning their back on the wicked capitalist ways, and they have seen the light. And those who would have gone there would have probably gone there exactly with this idea they're heading to a socialist paradise, which, again, absolutely didn't exist. And now it's different because it doesn't have that same immediate sort of ideological edge, but instead there is that sense of a cultural war that is being struggled, that is being waged. And in that struggle, the way that Putin frames it is in some ways that the Russians are the true Europeans, that Europe has lost its way, it's gone sort of ridiculously woke and all that sort of thing. We hold true to the proper European values, and therefore when these Westerners come to live here, they too are recognizing that. You can say this is proof, essentially, that history is on our side.
Well, have been a number of quite prominent Westerners, Mark, haven't there, who've gone to Russia over the last few years. Candace Owens is one of them. We've mentioned her earlier on in this program. Also, the podcaster Tucker Carlson. Where do they fit into all of this?
I mean, for these people, in some ways, they get their attention, their audience, their clicks, precisely from being counter-narrative voices. In other words, they have to be shocking, they have to be saying something different. And at the time when there is and I have to be honest, sometimes quite tiresome vein of Russophobia in a fair amount of Western coverage, being able to stand against that gets you the outrage factor. So, I mean, I think that there is an element of that that's in it for them. In some cases, the ego factor, the fact that you can go to Russia and then you will be feted. You will be given extraordinary access. I mean, you are treated as if you are important. You will get high profile precisely because you're getting to do things that no one else does. You're getting to be made to feel that you are special, and you are getting a chance to buck the Western mainstream. These are the sorts of assets or advantages that it offers to these people.
Well, there's no suggestion, Mark, that Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens have any links to the Russian government. But how much time and effort does the Russian government spend on these kinds of information campaigns to promote itself around the world?
I mean, it is a significant element, but I think we have to realize that this is not just simply designed to influence Westerners. It's also designed to shape the views of Russians themselves. This is why you're special, this is why you're great, and this is why you need to back the Kremlin, because it is spearheading this campaign. But the audience that is often ignored is actually in the global south, where actually Russia still has a really quite considerable degree of, let's say, social capital. And in part just simply by not being the West, but also where there are often more traditional religious and social movements, and that the Russians can pitch themselves to that. So although it's not a huge sum by the standards of what the Russian state is spending on its sort of wider geopolitical campaigns, from the Kremlin's point of view, it feels that it precisely, by targeting in a way these three audiences simultaneously, it actually gets, I would say, bang for its buck, but maybe in this case for its ruble.
How does Russia target those audiences, Mark? What are the nuts and bolts of how they do it?
It's a variety of ways. I mean, firstly, they're actually building their own network of media companies throughout the global south. We're seeing increasing sort of various foreign language services growing. We also see a great effort to essentially try to take advantage of the fact that we do live in an age of fragmented and diversified sources of media. A lot of the packages of video and the like that are put out by Russian news agencies are free to reuse. So, in many cases, what you actually have are people who end up recycling Russian material just simply because it's easily available and it's free. And the final element of all this is precisely that there are clearly cases in which, and again, as you say, no suggestions of the people we've mentioned so far, but certainly certain influencers and other sort of media figures being offered either direct payments or indirect ones through the sort of apparent corporate or other kind of structures to be nudged towards saying what the Kremlin would regard as the right things.
Is Russia winning the global PR game, Mark? Dan, who we spoke to earlier in this episode, said that around 3,400 Westerners have made the move to Russia on the so-called shared values visa. Do those numbers speak to a level of success?
Well, I mean, those numbers are trivial in the grand scheme of things. We're talking about, into a country with a population of 140 million. That doesn't matter. But the very fact that they have this shared values visa says something about this attempt to project Russia as both welcoming and open, as well as something that stands for something. And for every one person who moves there, there will be many others who follow their YouTube video feeds, or who are just simply aware of this. And they are aware that in that respect, at a time when so many Western countries are trying to close their borders, that Russia, if you're the right kind of person who believes the right kind of things, is willing to welcome you. That, I think, is much more important, the psychological messaging, rather than just simply the individuals who happen to take the plunge.
Thanks very much to Mark Galeotti and the BBC's Dan Hardoon. That's it from us for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. The Global Story is also an audio podcast. We're available every weekday on bbc.com or wherever you listen. Cheerio.